Welcome to today's RISSB Masterclass webinar, the role of the independent safety assessment in the co-regulation of major rail projects. And firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands where we meet today. And for me in Adelaide, that's the Kaurna people, and to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who might be with us today. So today's presenter is Andy Petrie, Director of Systems and Safety Assurance at Arch Artifacts. And as I said, on the subject of the role of the independent safety assessment in the co-regulatory environment. If I may, just before I introduce Andy, I guess over some of the recent webinars and certainly at the recent Rail Safety Conference, we've explored our co-regulatory model in Australia. And it's interesting, often when I'm engaging with industry, people say, oh, we're over-regulated. And I actually think that's far from the truth. And I think there's a general lack of awareness of what co-regulation is and the opportunities that it presents. But that's why we had the conference, and that's why we have webinars like this to take the opportunity to present, hey, we think we've got a pretty good co-regulatory environment. It's largely non-prescriptive. That doesn't mean there's no rules. It still has incredible obligations on duty holders, but there is greater opportunity for duty holders to literally design their safety systems. So Andy Petrie is Director of Systems and Safety Assurance at Arch Artifacts. Andy is a specialist leader and advisory services to clients across Australia with over 25 years of experience as a system safety professional, and he's held senior leadership roles with Transport for New South Wales and with Network Rail and Transport for London in the UK. He's currently the lead ISA for the Metro Tunnel project in Melbourne and was previously the lead ISA for Sydney Metro West. At Transport for New South Wales, he procured several major ISA engagements for rolling stock and the More Trains, More Services project, and was the client for several ISA submissions as the chair of the CCB. So you're able to enter questions into the chat and we'll refer to those at the end. But without any further delay, Andy, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Damien. Let me try and do the get the presentation to work thing. All right. So yeah, going to talk about ISA in major projects today. Damien's done an acknowledgement of the country. Just to note, I'm on Bidjigal land for the Eora Nation down here in Sydney. And Damien's talked you through a little bit through my ISA history and experience. I was just noting I came over to Australia just over 11 years ago, and the role I came to do was the lead independent safety assessor for what was then the Northwest Rail Link project, which is now Sydney Metro Northwest. As I say, I'm now Metro Tunnel project lead ISA down in Melbourne. I'm not going to talk about any specific examples of projects. That would be inappropriate. These examples are generic. They cover a whole heap of projects I've worked on, either directly as an ISA or as a lead, or actually from the team of colleagues and friends that I work with who are working on projects where they're being ISA'd by other ISAs as well. So there should be nothing specific here that relates to any project. Then you mentioned co-regulation. I think this is really important to understand when we talk about ISA. I'd originally put this topic forward as a topic for the conference a few weeks ago, and I'm quite glad they asked me to do it as a webinar, because it's only at the conference down in Melbourne I actually first really understood what co-regulation meant for the first time. Dr. Natalie Pelham and then Caroline Walsh both gave really good examples of how co-regulation works and put it really simple and straightforward. I'm going to try and do that justice here, and I apologise if I don't do it as well as they do. Rail Safety National Law sets the requirements for railways across Australia. It defines what an RTO should do and establishes their duties. It's then up to the RTO, and in this case, I'm going to talk about the RIM, the Rail Infrastructure Manager, to determine how they discharge their duties, and they establish their SMS. They get that accredited, and so again, the Rail Safety National Law describes the role of the RIM. The RIM puts in place their safety management systems. The role of the regulator then is to make sure that the systems they put in place meet the intent of the legislation, and then that they're actually following the processes as they apply them as a business. So that's the co-regulation model as is explained. In this context, the RIM is effectively a de facto regulator of their own processes, and the ONSA is then a double check that they're doing it in the way that they're intended. Now, this applies to the business as usual model. If you're operating a railway in normal circumstances, this is the general role. But sometimes we're delivering a major project. And when we deliver a major project, there is the ONSA major project guideline that requires that an ISA be put in place. It's an ONSA expectation. I think it needs to be met in most cases. For those projects, the RIM would then have a construction RIM safety management system. And again, a construction RIM is slightly different from the operation maintainer. That's described in the ONSA guideline, the effective control and management guideline. So the ISA is put in place to look at the major project. The ISAs look at the major project itself, but also the RIM processes around that. So a project is being delivered and handed over into operations and maintenance. The ISA is looking at the entirety of that process as well, how it's actually being put into O&M and then implemented as part of the business. So I see the role of an ISA as having two functions. I'm engaged by the RIM, and my primary reporting line is to the RIM to give advice, but I also have a dotted line back to the regulator as well, because they want assurances that the processes are being implemented as expected. So again, that's how I see the role of an ISA in terms of co-regulation. The ONSA Major Project Guideline, again, this is available on the website, in section 4.2 sets the expectation for independent safety assessment. I'm not going to read all of this out. You can read it yourself, and say it's available on the website. So it says expects independent safety assessment to be done. Assuring safe outcomes needs rigorous oversight of project safety processes. Independent safety assessment represents good practice as such a review. That's the key bit there, is the rigorous oversight of project safety processes, and then how that's followed. But it doesn't give any more guidance on this, and there's not really any other guidance available in Australia about how to implement ISA. So I think this leads to a fair bit of confusion, both between RIMs and parties undertaking ISA, that there's no actual, this is what you must do and this is what you mustn't do. That's led to a whole heap of different ways of doing it. You can be ISA'd on one project, go to another, you'll find a completely different way of doing it, and go to another, a completely different way again. So there's no common way of doing these things. And again, hopefully this presentation can help to sort of bring those things into a bit of alignment for you. First thing that I do tell everyone is actually there's two types of ISA. And it's really important that you understand which one that you're dealing with at any given time. I've extracted there on the left some clauses from Rail Safety National Law. You should all be familiar with this. I've not gone through the whole clause of section 52 and section 53, but just extracted the bits that are relevant to the RIM and the designer, because I'm going to use those two examples for clarity. They apply to other duty holders as well. The first role is for the RIM is to make sure that any design is done in a way that ensures the safety of rail operations. And it's very clear that it says in a way. And section 53 is ensure suffices that the thing is safe. So you've got two very, very different duties, whether you're delivering something or whether you're the RIM. And that relates to what ISA are engaged as well. Major projects, as we've said, you engage an ISA, and I call that an advisory ISA because the role of an ISA engaged by the RIM is to give advice to the RIM when they make their decisions. When I'm acting as advisory ISA, my role is to provide assurance that the processes are done or carried out in a way that assures safety. Obviously, there's a so far as it's really practical on back of all of these. The other ISA is a product ISA. Now, not all products need those, but typically if you're putting a signaling system in, a rolling stock, platform screen doors, or some other technology solution, particularly if there's a high SIL rating with it, then a product ISA can be engaged to provide specific assurance around that product. Now, this is the only time I'm going to talk about product ISA before I move on. The product ISA is given independent assessment that the thing is safe. So if you've got a duty holder who's providing rolling stock, and they might be designing and constructing rolling stock at the same time that they're providing rolling stock, as part of their safety case, whether it's their design safety case or their end safety case, they need to say this train is safe so far. That's it. That's their job, and that's their duty under the Rail Safety National Law. Their product ISA is also saying, in my professional opinion, the train is safe. So they're giving it a separate independent opinion on the safety of the product or the thing. Again, we deal with those all the time. When we've got new signaling systems and new rolling stock, we'd have an ISA letter from the product ISA. That is not the ISA letter that a RIM needs. They need to see that as part of the assurance artifacts that come from the rolling stock provider, but that is not the ISA that is needed by a RIM. Again, I'm not going to refer to product ISAs anymore through this presentation. The rest of it refers to the role of the advisory ISA. So what's an advisory ISA doing? Well, you're providing support and advice to the duty holder as the RIM, and the RIM's duty is to look at the overall processes, to regulate those processes, as we've said, to make sure that they're being followed as intended. So typically that RIM is going to have some form of decision-making body in their processes. It could be called a CCB, it can be a configuration change board, a change control board, a network assurance committee. There's various ways of doing this, and there might be others that I've not thought of as well. Their role as the RIM is to make sure that what goes onto the railway is safe. And they'll have a process where there'll be some design gates, might be multiple design gates, some testing, commissioning, dynamic testing gates, and ultimately that final gate where they let that product onto the operational railway. So what we're doing there is giving them advice on how we think the safety has been followed. Now, I'm not going to give an explicit statement saying it's the FARP. That's not my job. Absolutely no way. That's the role of the product ISA. That's the role of the supplier of the rolling stock. We're giving a view on the processes. And again, it's a recommendation. It's a professional opinion based on a number of things that we're going to talk about on the future slides. So when I'm giving recommendations to the RIM, these are 3 typical things that I would do. If we've had a look at their processes, we've kicked the tires, we think that they were applied in the way that they were intended and they were fit for purpose, we provide a letter of support saying we support the gate or support the progress to the next stage in the life cycle. They were applied as intended. Sometimes they haven't done everything. Sometimes there's a few shortcomings that need to be addressed. Whether I think they're fit to proceed or not is not the purpose of this letter. My purpose of this letter is to bring them to the advice of the duty holder. So we'll provide support with conditions. There might be outstanding items on the hazard log. There might be some signatures that need to be done. There might be some defects that need to be provided at the end of the day. The duty holder needs to be aware of those risks if they choose to proceed. They might say, no, the risks are too high, we're rejecting it. You're not going through the gate, please go back again. Or they may choose to proceed with those risks open. And finally, a do not support. And again, this is a professional opinion. If I was to have the view that there were serious safety failings in that project and they're not fit for purpose, my advice would be to give the duty holders that. Our view is the safety has not been ensured. And it's up to them to decide whether they reject that gate or take it forward. Because again, I'm not making a decision. One of the important things to remember is that duty holder at their CCB or their NAC, they're taking my advice and they can overrule and reject that. I'm an advisory party. They might have other information or have other priorities which they want to take into account. One of the examples when I was working at Transport for New South Wales, we had a CCB. The ISA recommended that the train did not go into testing. Internally, we decided we were happy to accept the risks that had been identified, and we allowed the train to proceed into a limited testing program. So you can overrule the ISA as well. It's the whole point of it is it's an advisory recommendation. So again, the role of the ISA, I've got to provide that letter and that advice at the end of my study period. So I'm looking for justified confidence that the processes have been done in the way that manages safety. First of all, just a quick reminder, assurance is a positive declaration to give confidence. This is the definition that's in Google. The party doing the design, providing the rolling stock, needs to give assurance to the RIM that they have done things in a way that is safe. The RIM then needs to accept that assurance in order to allow them to proceed. Accepting assurance is one thing, and the term justified confidence is actually, we want evidence around that assurance. So it's like taking your word for it. You wouldn't just go and buy a second-hand car off someone because they said it was safe. You'd want to go and lift the bonnet up, have a look inside, kick the tires, and look at the logbook before you bought it. So it's some risk-based activities to give you some confidence that the assurance they're giving is valid, it's supportable, and it's done the job it said to do. So justified confidence is the key thing. Here's some preferred assessment techniques. You may have other ones if you're on ISA. These are the ones that I like to use. I like to do observations. I like to sit in processes and watch them happen. If you're having a hazard workshop, invite the ISA along. I'll sit in there for an hour. If it all goes well, I'll write a note saying I've seen a hazard workshop. I've seen you do the risks associated with this particular activity. I know then for the rest of the project that you did a proper hazard identification exercise, and I don't need to worry too much about that until later on when I just want to check some evidence. A process deep dive. If you're doing a process such as a hazard log or a RVTM or a human factors issues register, whatever that process is that's managed ongoing through the project, at some cases I might want to do a deep dive. It's not my job to go line by line through your hazard log looking for quality issues. That's your job as the provider. I just want confidence that you're doing it right. So we'll open the hazard log. I'll say, look at item 17. Let's trace that through. Yes, that's okay. That's right. Item 25. Actually, no, that's some errors here. Go away and do a quality check on your hazard log, please, and let me know you've done it. That's how you do a process deep dive. They will come back and say, hey, we've had a look at our hazard log, we've identified a number of issues and we've corrected them. Okay, let's have a look at one of those. Fine. That's how you gain confidence that the hazard log is being managed from an ISA. An audit is a formal one. Everyone's been audited before. This is where we have to look at something that's deemed to be high risk or complicated. Typically a day or a 2-day audit, depending on the nature of the risks and the processes. Look at go through your management systems, identify some issues that we want to look at, have an audit in the meeting, say, can I please see item X? Okay, can I please see item Y? Okay, no, that's not really been done appropriately. Raise an issue to go away and deal with it, and then let me know when you've done it properly. It's about putting the duty to do the work on the duty holder themselves. It's not for me to be checking your work for you. Document assessment, again, we all know that there's going to be reports at the end, there's going to be safety cases, there's going to be assurance reports, whatever you want to call them. There's going to be things that need to be looked at. These are the important assurance artifacts. I've called this document assessment, and I'm going to come on to why it's called document assessment and not review on another slide. And another one's witnessing, and this usually happens at the later stage of a construction or some form of testing. If you're doing an important test activity where there's a whole pointer or milestone on the back of it, just invite the ISA along. If they can just stand and watch, see that the person who's doing the testing is competent, see that the test has been carried out. It's a great piece of evidence to close out the end of the life cycle as you come up the right-hand side of the V. So we've got all those ways of doing assurance. There's 5 processes. The way to do this is progressively right through the life cycle of the project. There's two graphs there. In each of those graphs, there's 12 assurance artifacts which are presented. If you want to count those little gold boxes. If you present those to me through the life of the project, we start by doing some observations at your hazard workshops. We then do those deep dives into processes. We might do an audit towards the end and the document reviews right at the end and a witness. By the end of the project, I'm going to have justified confidence that you've done your job. You've hit the good enough mark. What you've provided is fine. It does the job, and I can give a positive recommendation to the RIM to proceed. If you're not providing access to the ISA, like on the right-hand side, what actually happens is it doesn't stay at 0 confidence. You move into negative confidence. If a project's not providing me some information, and despite me asking for it, and weeks and months, and sometimes years later, they're not providing it, it's not just I don't have 0 confidence, I have negative confidence in that project now. And providing all of those bits of information at the end is just not going to be enough to get you over the line, because I know that you've been hiding those processes for me, probably on purpose. It's certainly going to feel like it was on purpose. So you actually get into a confidence deficit at the end, and you need to do much, much more to make that up. Another thing that happens at the end, when you get all the documents thrown on your desk the day before go live, you just haven't got time for a meaningful review. For an SME to look at a document, consider it, ask questions, go back to the authors and clarify those issues with them, it takes time. If you're simply providing me with a safety case the day before go live, my letter to the RIM is going to say, I have not had time to review this safety case, and that's it. And again, it's up to them to decide whether you go on or not. But again, provide things consistently through the life cycle of the project, and don't just dump everything over at the end with 5 minutes if you're to go for a major milestone. The fact that the milestone is delayed is your fault, not mine. You need to deal with the consequences of that. This is my 4-stage of assurance graph. Now, this doesn't just apply to ISA. This applies to any assurance processes, whether it's your internal team, your technical advisors, your independent reviewers, whatever. These are the 4 stages of assurance. Now, stage one, adding value. That's where a good ISA should be working. We should be doing risk-based activities to work out when to get to that good enough point. Good enough is all you need to be. There's no need to go beyond good enough. You don't get extra points going beyond good enough. It's the sweet spot. So knowing when we get to that sweet spot, that's great. You've done what you need to do. The processes are fit for purpose to ensure safety as far as reasonably practical. I'm happy. I will tell the RIM I'm happy, and that's the job of a good ISA. We then get to the things that start to go wrong in the assurance process. We get the gold plating. You know, if you did a bit more, it would be slightly better. If you did it this way, you'd have a better robust product. You can get a better outcome from doing that, but there's no point in going beyond what you need to do. It just costs money. When you get one of the red flags I get is you make it more SFARP argument, which again, just I won't go there. But you know, I prefer it done this way. I've seen it this way. There's no value in chasing perfect. It's just cost to your project and cost your taxpayer as well. You then get to a point where we've got perfect, but we're still going and making comments. We're getting into critical little issues here. Things that are minor issues, spelling mistakes, references out of date. You're just creating comments for the sake of it. And what happens when you've got too many comments is you lose the important ones. So while the cost effort is going up, the value is coming down, because instead of having 5 comments that I'm dealing with, I've got 400 comments, and there's 5 good comments in there that I should address, but I can't find them and I can't pay attention to them. So I'm getting lost. It's the classic, I can't see the wood for the trees reference. You're spending money, but actually you're degrading your safety argument to a point where in some cases you've actually made it worse, significantly worse than if you'd started. And the final one, the crossing the line, this is where you've actually then started directing the duty holder what to do. I'm going to talk about some examples later on, but when the RIM is telling the designer what to do, the RIM has become the designer. The RIM has taken on the designer's duties. You've crossed the line. You've blurred the safety argument now. And if anything happens later on, and that ends up in court, the judge is going to go crazy trying to work out who did what and who directed people to do things. So again, mention this briefly, and I said document assessment is not a document review. If you give me a document, I should be competent enough to know I can have a look at that document, see what I expect to be in it, check that it's in it, check that it says the right things, that the risks have been assessed, have been identified, check that there's a SFARP statement if it needs to be done. If I'm not sure of anything, I can ask some open questions. Describe how this was done. I can't find it. Okay, that you did it in a way that's different from how I expected it. That's fine. It's not the case where I should be in there telling people what to do. Any advisory ISO uses the word must or should. It should be a red flag to people. You should not be going into documents saying, I expect this in this document, because then you're actually now directing the document, you're directing the person how to do their safety argument. You've crossed, this is the beginning of the cross the line process. And why is that important? When Rail Safety National with the RIM is slightly different from the Work Health Safety Act, but in the Work Health Safety Act, you have the client, you have the designer. It's the same relationship, it's just the regulatory duties that come with it. If as a client you choose that you want to direct the design, that's fine, you can do that. But if you do that aware that the risks of those design decisions are yours, again, if you direct the construction, the risks are yours as well. But if you're just saying it's not my risk, it's the designer's risk, not my problem, but you're actually directing them, that's just not the case. It falls down. So again, if you're in any way, shape or form directing someone how to do their construction, how to do their design, you're taking on the liability of doing that. And if you want to do that, that's okay. But you have to be aware that you're doing it and know you're doing it and be aware that some of the liability lies with you as the client. So that's why from an ISA perspective, my job is to advise the RIM. I have no role whatsoever in saying must or should to a duty holder who's delivering their duties. I can advise the RIM and they can direct if they so see fit, but that's not the role of the ISA. So a document assessment is different from a line by line document review when you're accepting something. As I talked about there, you get to the crossing the line point. You get to a point where, and I use the term here, good ISA and bad ISA, okay, because it just makes the slides easier to do. Ask an open question. If I'm used to seeing something in a way, I would say I'm used to seeing this, I'd expect to see this here, and allow them to give them the opportunity to say, hey, we do it differently. We do that over here. There's an artifact there, we can show it to you, or it's done by, we follow this process, and that process is our normal process, and that's okay. And I'll accept that as an ISA if it sounds reasonable. I can have a look at that process. If an ISA is saying, this must be in the safety case, so I can't accept it, then the ISA is then directing how you write your safety case. Again, I've got examples where we've been told by ISAs, if you don't put this in the safety case, it's not SFARP, I won't accept it, and you can't go to your assurance gate. That's an instruction. There's no way that that's anything but an instruction by that party to put something in the safety case. Not only does it then damage the safety argument, but again, it puts the RIM in a bad position. Because if as a duty holder there's an accident, I can say later on, well, the ISA told me to put that in the safety case and then said it was SFARP because I did. It really puts the RIM in a bad position. If you want to do that, that's fine, but be aware that you're doing it and don't let it happen by accident on your project. Again, this is another one that happens. Again, just because the ISO's got the word independent in the title doesn't necessarily mean they're independent if you make them part of your governance process. As a RIM, you'll have your gate, you'll have processes, you may have reviews. There's a whole heap of things you can do as a RIM. It's up to you. But if you then make sure that the ISO is part of your process by saying, if the ISO's raised their comments, they all have to be closed before you come to my assurance gate, you've internalized the ISO as part of your review process. And it's no longer independent. You've actually given them part of your job to do. Typically, again, if they're providing detailed comments, line by line issues, and then sending it back to be dealt with, the ISO is providing instructions to the designer. They're institutionalized as part of your process. You are in effect providing those instructions as the RIM. So again, just be really careful when you're doing this. If that's what you want to work, that's fine. But if your ISO is providing instructions to your duty holders on your behalf, there are duties that they're coming from you. And those can bring up significant costs down the line as well. They can introduce project delays. And I think there's a point in time when someone's going to actually put a claim event back to their client to say, you know what, we did our duty, we demonstrated it was safe so far as it's really practical. Your ISO then delayed our project delivery by 6 months. That's your cost to overall. So just be aware that it isn't just safety, there's financial and commercial and operational risks to do with this as well. So again, just talked about that briefly. There's adding value. There's the first state of that chart, that graph. We're looking at, is it safe? Is it compliant with the contract? Can it be operated safely? Can we manage the assets, the life of the assets? There's a whole heap of things that add value by an ISO checking them. Then we get into non-critical issues where the ISO is raising comments in typos, document quality. I prefer it done this way, or I've seen it done this way. This is best practice. That's not required to get you to that good enough position. We start getting unnecessary comments. That leads to rework. So you're doing rework that's been required by the ISO, not by your own safety requirements as the duty holder to ensure it's safe so far. That can lead to delays, and ultimately those delays can cost you a lot of money. So an ISO can cost your project a lot of money if it's not done properly. And this is where on some projects we've crossed the line a bit, and people think ISO is a bad thing. They've gone past, they can't see the value add because it's the additional cost that cause a problem. So how do you procure an ISO? Well, when you're procuring an ISO, you're actually procuring an individual or a series of individuals rather than a company. When we go to market, normally we want to build a train. We're going to go to the train provider. We don't want to see who's the designer for that train. When you're procuring an ISO, you need to flip that round. You need to focus on the individuals. I had one example where we were rejected for a shortlist for an ISO because our company size wasn't big enough. They wanted a company with a turnover of so many millions per year that had been around for 10 years, so then they could guarantee the ISO was around. That was the first pass-fail criteria for an ISO for a major rail operator in Australia. That just sounds crazy to me. You want the best individual. You want someone who's worked as an ISO. You want someone who's delivered projects as well. I think getting an ISO who's been ISO and done nothing else for 10 years isn't the best solution. You want someone who's actually delivered a project. They actually understand what's going on and what to do to get over the line. Pragmatic and outcome focused is key. How do we get to the end? Where's good enough? Where's the outcome to get it over the line? Check the references. You know, we've been doing ISO for over 10 years in Australia. There's lots and lots of them. Someone you know will know one of the ISOs that you're talking about. Pick up the call and ask them, and look out for red flags. It's quite obvious sometimes when you're selecting an ISO or talking to them that they're going to cause you problems down the line. You can tell that just through the initial interviews. You want someone who's going to stay in that role for the period of the engagement. And while no company can guarantee that no one's going to get ill or retire or leave, you want someone who's been for the company for a while, has a good position, is likely to stay there for the foreseeable future. Because one of the worst things you can do is lose your ISO halfway through a project and find that another one comes in with a completely different set of requirements. You can't mandate that, but you can find ways to help encourage that. And when you're getting your ISO, you get what you pay for. Now, these are a couple of slides of some LinkedIn posts I provided. Competence is a mix of education and experience. You need to know the book side of it. You need to have a hands-on experience. A competent ISO has done both. So you want someone who's been on the job but knows how to do it at the same time and can balance the two of those to get the right outcome. That one on the top right, that's the Dunning-Kruger curve. Some of you have seen that. when you learn something, it's very easy to be overconfident in that, to think it's easy, to think that you're doing very good at your job. And as most people progress through their career, they'll realize that things are much more complicated before, again, becoming really good at what they do and gaining that confidence. If you think your ICE is one of those ones who stood on Mount Stupid, you should not proceed with them. You know, if they're just competent without the ability to back it up through understanding how difficult a role it is, then be careful. So when you're procuring an ISA, competence is key, but competence isn't cheap. So again, when part of your procurement process should be selecting the right ISA, not looking at cost. Again, I'm going to give some examples of that as we go on for the next few slides. When you're procuring an ISA, again, it's difficult through the procurement process to get this right because your procurement process will be driven by your corporate organization. On the left, you've got your good ISA. You know, they cost a certain amount of money. They will cost your business some money. That's okay, but that is value add. You know, they're looking at those safety critical things, those operational things, the things that you need to do to demonstrate you got to good enough. If you go to the other side, and again, remember my assurance graph, the 4 stage of assurance. Those are all hidden costs that you'll have to bear with your company. And those costs can be massive. They can be vast, they can be huge. And again, I like an iceberg graph, so this is why it's on here. But you know, 200% could be optimistic in terms of what that's costing you in over cost. So don't base your ISA purely on their 10% cheaper, 20% cheaper. They're not the criteria that will get you a successful solution and get you over the line with this. As one example, again, just taking it on from the previous one, when I was procuring ISAs a few years ago in Transport for New South Wales, one of the first things that you do is you set your procurement framework. And the typical one for procurement framework is, okay, 70% is cost, 30% is the other criteria. And I immediately said, no, we can't do this. We've got to stop this. This is not a way to procure an ISA. What's the maximum I can go the other way? And the maximum I could go the other way was 30% price and 70% of the other criteria. So that's what we use going forward. It would have been my preference, to be honest with you, to not actually have a cost component in there at all. And thinking on of how you do things now, I would even go as far as to tell the ISAs the budget at the procurement stage. So this is the budget. You demonstrate how the best value you can give to me out of that procurement. I don't want people coming in and trying to cut costs and provide me with a substandard product. But again, recognizing that most government organizations that procure ISAs have got very strict procurement rules, that's probably not the case, but it would give you a better outcome. So when you're packaging it up and you're thinking about how to do that, how are you going to best get the money out of your ISA? As a consultant, it's difficult to take a fixed price job because you're taking on risk and you don't know how that's going to pan out. But for me, I think an ISA job should be priced on a fixed price or a lump sum basis. It gives you the certainty, it gives you a budget to work to. And the ISA's not there trying to find things to fill their time to justify their salary. Again, so a friend of mine a while back said, you want to find an ISA with a day job, someone who's got other things to do with their time, so they're not just focusing 100% on your project to make sure they're getting their costs right. The flip side is that race-based engagement. If you're requiring your ISA to put timesheets in and justify their time, to justify their hours, then they've got to do that to make sure that they're earning their money. And in some cases, that often leads to the overassurance that we talked about earlier on the graph. You know, the gold plating sometimes, the detailed comments, and particularly the stepping the mark. That's when your cost balloon on a project is because they're trying to justify how that project makes the time and the money. Now, those people may not own companies, they have bosses, they have to, if they budgeted $2 million for that project, they expect to earn $2 million for that project, and they will have to fill their time to do that. And again, by doing this, you're incentivizing that cash for comments. I don't know the exact number on this one, but someone's told me it costs you $50 to raise a comment. It costs you $500 to close that comment out. So every time that part, and this isn't just an ISA, this is technical advisors or independent reviewers or independent certifiers. It doesn't matter who's raising those comments. That it's simple to raise a comment. Someone's got to go away. They've got to think about it. They've got to write it down. They've got to check. They've got to respond. They've got to come back to the person who raised the comment in the first place, making them some more money, and then go through that cycle. And sometimes those comments could take not $500, but $5,000 to close out, or $50,000. So you want to find a way that you're not incentivizing this cash for comments approach for ISAs. So just as a few takeaways at the end of that, it was a lot to go through. Understand your role as the RIM and the role that you're expecting your ISA to play. you are regulating your own processes. The ISA is advising you on how those processes are being applied. That's the basis of what that position should be as an advisory ISA. If you've got a product ISA working in some of your suppliers, that's fine. Just be aware they're working for a supplier. That's not your ISA. Be clear who your governance body is and how that the ISA will be advising them. As I said previously, it's okay for you to ignore the ISA's advice, provided you've got an explanation to do it and you document the fact that you've done that. That's the role of your governance body. There's many things at play in a major project than just my opinion. I'm just one part of the jigsaw. Work with the ISA to deliver progressive assurance to build that justified confidence. Start at the beginning and engage them on day one and engage them regularly and keep it going and keep it going. So you get to the end of the project, there's no surprises, everyone's happy. We've dealt with the issues as they arose, not these things at the end. Don't just throw things over at the end and expect them to be reviewed or assessed in a couple of days. If you don't provide me time to meaningful review your artifacts, I'm not going to review your artifacts. It's not my role to ruin my weekend to try and make up for your project delays. You'll get a letter saying that I haven't reviewed those artifacts. You've provided them, but they've not been reviewed. And then so we get to the graph, make sure your ISA is not gold plating, making it more far. I'd like it done this way. I've seen it done this way. You should have considered these things. No, good enough. That's all we need to do. Don't incentivize them to raise comments. Comments kill projects. Comments are the worst thing that can happen. And now we've got into this Teams environment and document reviews. Comments just balloon and roll out of all proportion. So minimize comments. And absolutely make sure your ISA is not issuing de facto instructions to your designers without your knowledge and your say-so. That will kill your project, and it's, as I say, it's probably breaching your safety duties by doing it. Don't make your ISA part of your internal governance process. They're there to advise. They shouldn't be doing the approval for you. If you want someone to do a detailed review of a document as a RIM, get someone on your team to do a detailed review of the document. Don't get your ISA to do it. That's not their role. Procure the right ISA, not the cheapest ISA. You need to get the right person to make sure your project is a success. Ask the right questions during the interviews, do panel sessions, do what you need to do to make sure you're getting the right person or the right team of people, and they will stay with you for that project as far as you can. And think about your payment model. Make it so you're not having to incentivize the ISA to do things that are not necessarily best. There's a risk balance here. You can both share the risk between you. It's fine, but think about how they can provide you advice sensibly through that project. And ultimately, this is the key one. If it's not working, try and intervene and course correct. If you find that your ISA is doing any of these, speak to them and ask them to stop. It's your contract and you're able to do that. Ultimately, if they won't stop, find another ISA at the end of the day. But make sure the ISA is advising you in the way that they're supposed to. And I believe that is all of my comments. If you don't already, follow me on LinkedIn. You find loads of assurance articles there, and please engage me on those. The comments are fantastic. So yeah, any questions? I'll stop sharing now, Damien, and then we can have a chat, I think, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that, Andy. Honest and enlightening, I'd summarise that as. No particular, I've got a few questions, no particular order. This one, are there any obligations for ISAs to have their competency assessed, similar to suppliers under the TAO matrix? Sorry, whatever the TAO matrix. But is that about sort of a some sort of chartered society of ISAs? Could that be the case?
There isn't. I mean, the TAO is in New South Wales. It's the Technically Assured Organisation. It used to be called AEO, Authorised Engineering Organisation. That any organisation doing work for Transport for New South Wales must have a competence process in place. If you're an ISA in New South Wales, you should be a TAO, and it requires you to have those competence arrangements in place. But so we have them, for example, and most of the ones who work in New South Wales will. Other than that, it's up to the client to specify what they want. And an ISA contract will usually typically say 10 years experience as a lead ISA, whatever, as one of the minimum requirements around that. But no, I would always check with your organization how they determine that ISA is competent, but there's no requirement as such, no.
Okay. Hi, Andy, great presentation. Also love your hazard log series on LinkedIn. You didn't write this as you were doing it, did you?
I should have done that one, yeah.
It seems like there is a huge scope between good and bad ISA. Do you think that further guidance on the role of an ISA could help reduce this gap?
I think so. I mean, as I say, there's the requirement in the major project guideline. There's a few documents from a few organisations that are probably a little bit old now. I know Transport had one probably about 10 years ago when ISA was just starting. There's probably an opportunity to review those and provide some guidance. And again, it might be something we can work with RISSB and the regulator to do that if there's an opportunity, Damien.
Okay. What, and you can be as detailed or general as you like on this question, what opportunities or challenges does a non-prescriptive co-regulatory environment present to ISA work?
It depends what you do. Each organisation puts in place a safety management system that they see fit, and you have to be up to speed with their approach. And the challenge, again, sometimes it's different in each state. Sometimes it's different with each operator. Sometimes some will have, they will have some detailed SFOP guidance how they manage risk. Sometimes they'll use a LARP, and if that RIM uses a LARP, then that's how they do their processes. That's fine. So it's just a wording change. It doesn't actually matter. But if you go into an organisation and say I don't accept your processes, so being open to the way they do it, and working with the RIM as well, you understand who the duty holders are in the RIM and get to know them and get to understand what they want. They will have their CCB, their NAC, whatever it is. Actually understand, what are you wanting to see on this assessment? What are you wanting me to look at? What are you wanting me to have a look at? So tailor it to their specific needs and their specific processes, but don't try and apply the process you used on project A to project B without actually wondering what the differences in their management systems are.
Okay, thank you. What are your thoughts on how we become an intelligent client when working with an ISA, within an ISA relationship?
The ISA plan is obviously very important at the start, but it's very easy to write a plan and not follow it. I think maybe depends how much you know them and how much you trust them. If you're a new supplier, there's no harm you doing observations with the ISA as well. Sit in a couple of their assessments, look at their comments that they're raising, and actually be happy that they're doing the right thing. So you can independently assess the ISA if you want to, until you're happy with them, because you have to have that confidence in the ISA to do their job, so you can step back as well. So to get to the point where you've got justified confidence in your ISA is important. You can only do so much through a procurement process. I would always recommend doing some interviews and some sessions with your prospective shortlist of ISAs on the procurement session before you select one, to actually understand what they're going to do in reality. And again, look for those, ask those questions that raise the red flags. You'll identify it on day one. But yeah, just assess them as well. You've got to have confidence that the ISA is doing their job and discharging what you want them to do. So you can audit them and look at them too. Okay.
Now, I don't know if this one is a theoretical scenario or real. A supplier submitted limited evidence to demonstrate compliance to a standard. They insisted that some relevant documents being requested are internal intellectual property, which can only be audited with restrictions but not submitted. Where is the line between sufficient evidence and IP, please?
I mean, typically that's going to be a provider with a product ISA. If they've got specific software or IP that their product ISA can have a look at, then that's perfectly fine. That's the easy way to do it. If the product ISA has looked at it and said, I've looked at this, it's been audited, it complies, then I'm going to accept that statement. One of the principles of ISA is cross-accepting works that other ISAs have done. So if something's already been assessed by another ISA, you should in theory be able to accept that. Now, sometimes you have to do some risk-based due diligence on that itself, just to be on the safe side. But if someone else has looked at it, but typically, again, if they don't have an internal ISA and they've got quality management systems and quality process, they can assure me an audit has been done, show me an audit report that has been undertaken by a competent person and have a look at it, then I'll accept that, because my job is to receive assurance from the supplier, not to check what they've done.
Okay. How does the role of an ISA differ across various stages of a rail project, or does it, or should it, from initial planning to execution and final assessment?
Through the life cycle in your planning stage, it's light touch. You want to make sure that they've identified the big risks and issues and they've considered them in their option analysis. You typically wouldn't necessarily have an ISA report for a planning stage document like a business case, but we have engaged them previously to look at those processes as well, knowing that they're going to follow it through the life cycle of the project. Design is the key one for the ISO, really. You're looking at the design processes because that's where the majority of the big decisions that are made that affect the life cycle to the rest of the product. You're then buildings depends what it is. If it's a civil construction project, you can probably step back a little bit here because you're really letting the project build its own thing. And then at the end, you're just looking for that construction evidence, some, that's inspection test plans have been done, witness and hold points have been checked off. When you get into dynamic testing, again, this is where you're moving trains in a network. That's when you want to witness those tests being undertaken and understand that they're doing a progressive approach. And one of the key bits, again, which I think a lot of people forget about, is before that is handed over into operations and maintenance, is making sure that the operation and maintainer are ready to accept it. So part of the role of the ISO is not just looking at the design of the constructor, but looking at their operations and readiness team of the room as well to say they've designed it and built it correctly, but your team aren't ready to accept it yet. You actually have to do some more as well. So it varies throughout the stages, but there's a role from the beginning to the end for an ISO.
Okay. Just wonder if you've got any examples of innovative approaches or methodologies that have significantly improved safety outcomes in major rail projects.
I do, but I don't think I can probably talk about them in the context of an ISO because I can't talk about specific projects in this example. One of the things I do talk about is comments kill projects. Finding a way not to deal with comments is actually innovation compared to what most projects do. I know a few ISOs do this. Where we have a Cat 3 comment, a minor comment, it's more than a spelling mistake, but something that's not really that important. We just raise it, get them to acknowledge it, and then we don't track it. Once they've accepted that, yeah, we'll update that in another version, they've got a record of it, we move on. So actually finding a way to not be bogged down by minor comments is actually quite innovative and helps you take things. So you can innovate in process as well as in technology.
Okay. And maybe we'll make this the last one. Can a project without conformance to ISO 15288 but has process and evidence that all safety requirements, including derived safety requirement, being identified and verified by design and validated by testing and commissioning, will that support the safety case?
Provided they've met the same intent as that standard. Standards, the ISO standards, they're not rules, they're not regulations, they're not Australian standards, they're good practice guidance, and on the basis that you followed good practice, you've demonstrated it. If they've met the intent of that standard, they can demonstrate that their safety processes meet the same outcome. I'd be happy to accept that. Provided, again, if it was in their contract they had to do it, then no, I'm not going to step in and say that that's a contractual issue. But provided they've done all the reasonable steps to demonstrate safety, and it might vary from that standard, as long as it gets the same outcome, then an ISO, I'm happy that the process has been followed.
Okay. There's one other here which I think be worthwhile. When you were presenting and you were talking about fixed price versus sort of daily rate, I just thought, well, I get your intent around fixed price, but that would require an awful amount of work to get the scope right. But if you're planning a project on these scales, you need to get the scope right.
You need to get the scope right. You'll have a budget before you go into procurement. You're not going here with the ISO telling me what my budget is. You've got a budget, and if someone comes in vastly over that, you're not going to procure them. But at the same time, you don't want someone coming in vastly under that as well. That's the key bit. If you got a mega project, it's a couple of $1 billion. You put $1 million a year for your ISO, and someone comes in with $150,000 a year, you shouldn't be procuring that person. And the same way if they come in as $10 million a year, if you know what your budget is, you can work to that budget. And ISO is risk based. They say we shouldn't be reviewing everything. We should be looking at the risk. You do a risk assessment and work out what you think that would be, and there's many ways you can do that. And you know what your budget is, so you can work to that. And I say you're not allowed to share these things, but in the ideal world, you would be able to say, can you work to this budget?
Excellent. I think you answered that question without even it being asked. So look, Kat, thank you very much. Really good presentation and subject. You obviously know your stuff. And it is a subject matter that the industry will continue to mature at, but I think only through having these sorts of discussions and sharing of learnings. That I think I speak on behalf of everyone who was online, and we've still got 216 captivated people here.
So
really
we
appreciate
spoke
your time.
earlier. If there's any questions that haven't been answered, we'll have a look at those, and I might update them in a future LinkedIn article to try and address them offline as well. So if your question hasn't been answered, we'll see how we can maybe update those and share it with the groups through the LinkedIn page.
That's fantastic. Really appreciate your time. Thanks, Andy, and thanks everyone. The next, we haven't yet got the next one lined up, next webinar lined up, but we will in the next week or so, and we'll get the invites out for that. Thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Enjoy your day. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.